Hello, this is Joe Welinske of Writers UA, and I'm talking with some of the many speakers who will be talking at our event in Charleston coming up at the end of October. And today I am visiting with Neil Perlin. How you doing, Neil?
I'm good. How are you, Joe?
Ah, pretty good. I'm here in Seattle. Where are you speaking to us from today?
I am about 25 miles north of Boston, and the leaves are already changing. Kind of a frightening thought.
All right. Well, it's good to talk to you. I haven't spoken with you for a while, and you're going to be talking about a couple of things at the conference, as well as helping out with the more interactive workshop sessions that we're doing. And yeah, let's just talk about some of those topic areas that you're involved with, and one of those is structured authoring, and you're going to be talking about some techniques for structured authoring in a help authoring tool. And I know in my own experience that there's a lot of different ways to define what structured authoring is. There's different levels to which you can do it. When I'm with my students in a structured authoring class that I teach at local college, we look at structured authoring in a lot of different ways, just starting from what structured authoring mean when you're in Word, for example, while applying style sheets and adding structure to that content so that you're separating your words and images from the presentation. And I know you do a lot of work in this area. So, in terms of structured authoring, how do you look at it? How do you frame it for your own clients and your projects and that type of thing?
Well, I find that there's different ways to frame the discussion, but one of the things that I found early on is that the best way to frame it was to define structured authoring as authoring with structure. In other words, to not pin it down to a particular tool, particular standard, anything like that, but simply to say it's material to which some sort of structure has been applied, and then you figure out what that means, figure out how to do that. So, generally, I find that there's obviously a strong move toward doing this with DITA, and that's fine. I agree, DITA is a very powerful standard. There are some very powerful tools that support it. I've actually worked with DITA since 2002. I was on one of the OASIS boards for a while. But one of the things I found, and this may simply be a reflection of who my audience is that it's too complex for a lot of people, too complex and too demanding. And they just don't have the time, they don't have the technical backup, or they don't have the technical, basically the technical firepower to undertake such a huge shift in how you create products, how you create content. In fact, I had a client a few years ago. I think it was a RoboHelp training client where the client told me that the CTO wanted to come down and meet me. And I said, great. And they said, we have to warn you, don't use the letters DITA in front of him or he'll throw you out of the building. And they had a bad experience, to put it mildly. So, one of the things I found is that if you define structured authoring as authoring with structure, I found that there's two ways that I can create that kind of structure, both of which have to do with our familiar help authoring tools like Flare and RoboHelp. And one way is to define and apply a topic type template that'll control the structure of the material. And then the second way is to define and apply a CSS that will control, obviously, the format. And between the two of them, you can impose a lot of structure in terms of literally the structure, like the sequence of the material and the style of the material. What you don't get is, of course, any sort of governance capability and any enforcement. And that's the big difference.
So this
Now,
and so that yeah, so that's probably where you start to the line starts to blur into uh, the value of more robust content management system where it's really important that uh, that all the markup is valid with
Valid.
respect to the needs of that project, and in that all the various rules that you've set for how that documentation should be output is followed. And yeah, certainly uh, large scale content management systems can really lock that down very effectively, which works out really good with large documentation groups where information is spread widely across different groups, and you have want to have consistency. So you're looking at maybe a profile that's maybe smaller of scope in nature. Would that
Well,
be right or
s-
not?
sort of. The problem is it's hard to define smaller scope because I do a tremendous amount of Flare training and consulting. I do a lot of RoboHelp work, and what I find every time I go in with a client is I'll say, "How big is your project?" And many of them will say, "Oh, it's huge. We have 500 topics." And this kind of
Yeah,
thing,
it's all relative.
it's all relative to how new you are to the process. But so far, the largest project that I've worked on had 173,500 topics. And the client was very emphatic about the 500. Anybody can have 173,000. And I mentioned this to a guy I know who works for a company in Denmark. And he said, we have 400,000 topics. So, at that level, you need a content management system. But I've had people tell me we clearly need a content management system and content management system driven structured authoring because we have 500 topics. So, one of the problems is that if you're just moving into this space, you don't really have a sense of the scale of the context of what you're doing. And it's actually easy to overbuy, to overcomplicate things. I tell people that you can often do as much in terms of control using Windows Explorer as you can with a CMS, a full blown CMS in a lot of cases. Obviously, there's features that you don't get with Windows Explorer, but if you have 500 topics and or 1,000 topics or 10,000 topics, and you're imposing structure through the use of a style sheet, table style sheets, topic type templates, information templates, and so on, you can go a long way toward imposing structure without the complexity and cost of a full blown CMS. And people are often very happy to hear that. And that is, in fact, one of the central themes of one of the two presentations that I'm doing.
So if you were going along with your idea about building topic type templates and working with style sheets, so if you're working on a RoboHelp project, how much customization are you doing with the style sheets, and how much outside of the uh, straight out of the box, what you get straight out of the box, how much are you having to customize for your individual projects?
And speaking as a consultant, the usual answer is it depends. I've had clients who really wanted the thing customized and wanted the CSS customized. I've had clients who really didn't care that much, either because they weren't being driven by a heavy aesthetic sense, or they just decided that the out of the box settings for the CSS were adequate for their needs, and they just didn't want to go to the effort of customization. My experience is that most people want some prettying up and some customization in terms of creating custom styles and then modifying their properties. But I usually tell people I can put together, if you give me a CSS and sit me down with your graphic people or just marketing, I can take the out of the box CSS and pretty much get it to your liking within 2 or 3 days, much of which is simply spent reviewing what it looks like and arguing over which shade of blue to go with. In other words, the mechanics are usually pretty straightforward and pretty quick. So the answer is it depends on the client. There is some customization, but we're not talking about weeks or months. It's a very quick process,
Hmm.
and that's what people like because they get to work quickly.
Well, then another one of the topics that you were going to be talking about at the conference was related to people who have just started working with Flare, Madcap's Flare. Um, so, what are some of the common challenges that you find that people have when they start working with that product?
I find the biggest challenge people have, especially if you're new to Flare and if you're new to online documentation, but even if you've come out of another online help authoring tool, is that there's so many features to Flare and there's so much depth that it's as if I drove a dump truck up to your cubicle, dropped off several tons of options, and drove away. And the problem is people often have trouble understanding what's the difference between a master page and a page layout. What is a CSS? I've had people tell me that they knew these styles things were important, but they never quite knew what to make of them. Um, I had a woman from San Francisco call me a couple of years ago to tell me that she had been investigating a particular feature on the style sheet editor, and she'd spent 10 months on it and couldn't get it to work, and her company had never sent her for training. So she found me via Google, did a Google search for Flare consultants, called me up, and just said, I've been trying to do X for 10 months and I can't make it work. And it was one of those cases that one of those stories that you just tell at conferences, because I said, are you in Flare? Yeah. Are you at the style sheet editor? Yep. And I said, look up at this pull down in the upper right corner, click the pull down, and you see I think it was the second or third option. And it was quiet for a second. And she said, oh, bleep, thank you, and hung up. And the problem is these tools, all these modern tools are so powerful that I can throw a lot of options at you, but without some guidance as to which of those options to use or not use, it's just incredibly confusing. And that really is the subject of the second presentation.
Well, I mean, just talking about people starting with traditional help authoring tools in general, you have experience with a lot of different ones, including RoboHelp, but we're familiar with other products as well, like AuthorIt and Doc2Help and Oxygen and so on.
For
Do
help.
you how much do you find that people that are just getting these tools are familiar with best practices for putting together help systems, whether that's browser-based user assistance or compiled HTML help? Just in terms of what is that, what that design? Because to me, it seems like uh, that's a big case as well. If you don't really know what makes up good help, then how do you even know how to use the tool to generate a successful solution?
Right, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that I tell people, whether it's in a class or with a consulting job, is I tell them that if I'm doing training, I'm really there for a couple of reasons. The physical use of the tool is almost a minor reason because you can learn to use the mechanics of these tools very quickly and very simply. And in fact, when I do a lot of classes, when we start doing something like defining a skin, for example, I'll actually give people a time hack. I'll say, okay, it's 1:30, and we're going to start creating a skin. And when we're finished, I'll say, okay, it's 1:45, and we've created a skin. It took 15 minutes, but if you factor out the time I spent talking, it might have taken 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So I'm going to teach the mechanics, but the other thing that I do, and I'm very upfront about this, is that I'm going to spend as much time as I can on design issues, best practice issues, management issues, maintenance issues, trends going forward that may affect you. In other words, give people the bigger picture. Because without that, um, I've worked with people who have been self-taught in Flare or RoboHelp, and often I think to a really impressive degree. I've actually said to people, "You figured that out," and they were very proud of themselves because they figured out the mechanics of how to perform some task, but they weren't quite sure what the design rationale was for using a feature or not using a feature. And that is what training and consulting brings. Basically, the trainer or the consultant has already made the mistakes and is sparing you from those mistakes. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm always a little bit concerned when I see people that are just using the tools more or less as a black box, which it's possible to do. You know, if you get past the basic things that you were talking about, and you're able to have some idea of an introductory way to develop a help system. With most of the tools, it's possible to press a few buttons once you have your content in there, and it's going to generate it. But it's going to generate it only to the level of customization that you put into it, and so hopefully we're able to get out the message of different ways to
mhm.
customize your content, customize its presentation, the elements that are included, and I don't really have any data about that. I just anecdotally noticed that um, there's a lot of people that just kind of use the very most basic output.
Yeah, I agree. And in many cases, I find that people need to get something out and they can pretty it up or jazz it up or just best practice it up later, but they need to get something out now. And I understand that because we don't have time to really get into the depths of good practice. But I tell people that that's a perfectly valid argument. But the problem is if you work that way, you'll never have time later on to go back and fix it because there'll always be some other demand. So do it right from the start or do it as right as possible from the start, and it will save you a lot of trouble. And your material will look better. And also, you'll start developing good habits going forward. So rather than just blast out whatever the bare minimum default is, look at what you're doing, understand what the style sheet does, understand what the templates are, et cetera, and try to design not perfectly because no one has the time to do that, but try to define good or better from the start. And the tools support that pretty well. Um, Biggest problem again is that people are just so overwhelmed at the end of a class that I actually have people after a class who will call me up and have me come out for a day, maybe 2 days. I had one client this summer who had me come out to a site in Denver for 4 days, and we just walked through everything they were doing and revisited it. So, it's fun because I get to see what people are doing to a level, to a depth that I don't ordinarily see in the class. And it's good. Some of this I do through NatGap. Some of this I do, especially for the RoboHelp stuff, on my own. But it's just a good, constant exposure
Yeah.
to changing practices and what people are doing.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for spending a few minutes with me talking about this stuff, and we'll catch up in more detail when I see you in Charleston in October.
Very good. Thanks for the call, and I'll look forward to seeing you down there.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Bye bye.